So this is our first week of storytelling online for our virtual festival. And without further ado, I want to go ahead and introduce our teller for today. Barney Bradshaw is our storyteller for today. He was a member of the Missouri Historical Society, and he worked at the Missouri History Museum as an education director for many years, and is currently on the St. Louis Storytelling Festival Advisory Council. And he has been a regional storyteller for the festival for a few years now. And he typically will go into schools and libraries and do presentations on historical topics, a topic that he knows very well. So for today, he's going to be sharing some stories about Missouri fires and steamboats. So really informative and fun stories. He's a great storyteller. And before he gets started, I want to go ahead and let you know, I'm going to type a survey link into the chat box. It's right there. Hopefully everybody can see that. At the end of the session today, it would be great if you all could fill that out and let us know what you thought. It's just a way for us to kind of know how we can improve this festival. And we look forward to hearing back from you. So without further ado, I want to turn this over to Barney Bradshaw so we can hear about Missouri fires and steamboats.
Hello, good morning, everybody. Hope you're doing well out there. I'm sorry, perhaps you do recognize me. I don't know why they put my picture in the newspaper like they did. All I was doing was my job. You see, I'm a fireman here in the city of St. Louis. Why, you may not know this, but we were the second city in the entire country to have a paid fire department, after only Cincinnati, Ohio. They, of course, are very similar to us in that they have a lot of steamboats stopping by there. Steamboats, why, they're the best mode of transportation you're going to find, but also quite often a very dangerous mode of transportation. The fires on the water can easily spread to the fires on land. I'm sorry, once again, let me introduce myself. My name is Phelim O'Toole. Once again, I'm a fireman here in the city of St. Louis. Why, you may recognize my picture from the paper. They put my picture there and said, called me a hero. Well, I'm no hero. All I was doing was my job. Well, the Southern Hotel just down there at 4th and Chestnut, it caught on fire and we all came running just as we were supposed to. But you know, the hotel itself was 6 stories tall. Why, our Skinner ladder, it only goes up to the 4th floor. They called me a hero for what I did, but all I only did was my job. There were people on the 4th and 5th and 6th floors who barely could be reached. I heard them screaming, crying for help. What else could I do? The ladder went up to the 4th floor, so I climbed it all the way up. And then to the people on the 5th and 6th floors, I said to them, tie anything you can together, bed sheets, ropes if you have them, lower them down to me and I will come and get you. I was just doing my job. So that's what they did. Several people on the 5th floor, they all gathered in one room. They tied some sheets together. I simply climbed up as fast as I could, and then one by one, I lowered them down to the ladder on the 4th floor, where then they would shimmy on down as fast as they could. I let 8, maybe 10 people down that way. The smoke, the fumes, I couldn't see, I couldn't breathe. I don't know what else to do, but there were still more people. People on the 6th floor, they were calling for me. They were needing help. What could I do? I'm a fireman here in the city of St. Louis. So I did my job. Once again, I called to them, lower down blankets, lower down whatever you can to reach me, and I will come and get you. So that's what I did. Once again, I climbed up to the 6th floor. Now I had 2 stories in which to lower the people down to the ladder, but one by one, I did the best I could. Several women I saved. Finally, that's again the smoke, the heat, the fumes, looking at my feet, my face, my eyes. I could barely see anything. So finally, the last man, a rather stout man from Cincinnati, I simply grabbed him up. I threw him over my shoulder. I leapt out the window, grabbed the curtains and things as I could on my way down. Little by little, I lowered myself and him down to the ladder on the 4th floor, on the outside, of course, of the building, and then lowered ourselves down. It was amazing. Anybody made it out of there alive. And in fact, 38 people would die in the Great Southern Hotel fire. Well, By then, we got down to the ground, got our equipment out of the way, and then all 6 stories of the wall of that structure came tumbling down into the streets. We barely got out with our lives. The city of St. Louis, why, they called me a hero. I'm no more a hero than you are, just a man doing his job. They gave me a $500 reward. Why, I did not keep that money. I donated that money to an orphanage here in St. Louis. Some people, I'm told, they've written a song about me. Phelim O'Toole, why, I've not heard the song yet, but I can only thank those who wrote that and tell them once again, I was just doing my job. The real heroes are those who don't get paid and have only civic pride and duty for what they call upon themselves to go help and extinguish the fires and save lives here in the city. Those men, the men of the Great Fire of 1849, the volunteers who saved at least what they could of the city. Perhaps you've not heard that story before. Well, I'd be happy to let you know. I was not there, but I've heard all the details from the firemen and the volunteers who were. There were 10 volunteer fire companies in the city of St. Louis in 1849. Many neighborhoods would have their own. Why, the Irish had a company, the Germans. People took great pride. And it was also a, kind of a social organization where men could go and socialize when they were off. But on this night, September 17th, 1849, this was no drill. These men fought for their lives, the lives of others, and the life of the city of St. Louis itself. Let me tell you this, once again, the steamboats, you have to have an idea of what they are. Floating matches upon the water, just waiting for a spark to be lit. Why, they're built of white pine, covered in flammable paint. The paint contains linseed oil, and quite often, being in service for several years, the pine, the wood would dry out considerably. All they needed was a spark. These things weigh anywhere from 300 to 400,000 pounds, solid wood. And on them, of course, they have cords and cords of wood to keep the boats going. And if not wood, they had coal, and then also whale oil would keep them going. The lanterns lit at night, sparked the fuel. Well, May was kind of rainy in 1849. Normally there would be 3, 4, 5, or 6 steamboats come up to our levee and unload and then load their goods and head on to where they were headed. But on this May, it had been raining quite a bit. The cargo had started to stack up on the levee. Why, there were tons and tons, bales and bales of hemp, cotton, lumber for a growing city. And of course, you know what was going on in 1849. Why, the Great Migration West. Hundreds, if not thousands of people going through St. Louis on their way to a greater life. The gold rush. Why, as I look into the audience, I see several people. I know their fingers are itching right now just speaking about the gold. They were headed out for a new life. Men, women, children, and not just farmers, workers, people of all ages and groups. Somebody once told me, if you were to take a loaf of bread and slice it, every one of those slices would represent a different group of people heading out to California and Oregon in a new life. Well, they were getting their supplies in St. Louis. This was the best place. Why, if you waited to get to Independence, Missouri, you're going to pay more. So people got their goods here in the city of St. Louis. Anything you wanted in the world could be purchased on our levees. Perfume from Paris, goods from Sheffield, England, metalworks. What did you need? Wool from England, cotton, anything in the world could be bought right here on the levee. Well, in May, it had been raining a bit. So once again, the 4 and 5 boats that were normally here for a day or two had now lingered. Now there were 10 boats, and then 15, then 20, and then 22 boats, 22 steamboats lined up along the river's edge here at the mouth, at the doorway of the city of St. Louis. Now, friends, my math is not the best, but if you have 20 boats and each boat weighs approximately 400,000 pounds of white pine covered in flammable material, you have roughly 8 million pounds of wood waiting at the doorstep of the city of St. Louis. One that itself was now rather old. What we call the Creole part of town was made primarily of wood, where the draymen and those of the working class would live. Well, this day, May 17th, actually finally dawned beautiful. The sun was out, The birds were chirping. You could hear and smell bacon cooking. Everything was big. All the draymen were out, all the businessmen, everybody selling their wares. It was a good day for a while. Around 8 o'clock that night, the fire alarm started to ring. It seems that the White Cloud, the northernmost boat, now what I mean by that is, you know, the Mississippi River, of course, runs from north to south. Well, the northernmost boat was a boat called the White Cloud. The White Cloud was on fire. The alarms went out around 8 o'clock at night, and all of a sudden, all the volunteer fire departments that could come raced to the scene. The White Cloud was now fully engulfed in flames. The men got on the boat next to it. The Edward Bates started pouring as much water as they could onto the flames, but to no avail. Finally, and some people here have one story or another, I've been told that the White Cloud somehow lurched back from the riverfront. Now, quite often when a steamboat was on fire on the riverfront, you would cut the mooring cable, you know, the line that holds the boat to the levee, very thick, very sturdy rope made out of 100% hemp. But somehow the boat became disengaged from the levee. To this day, it's not known whether the mooring line burned through or cut through. You see, quite often, well, that's what you did. If a boat on the levee was on fire, you cut the mooring cable, you push the boat out into the river. The current would carry it south. Once again, the river running from north to south. The wind here in St. Louis, very prevalent, coming from the west. Quite often, even today, you will hear, what is tomorrow's weather going to be like? Well, I simply look at Kansas City's weather today, and that will be our weather tomorrow. Our weather comes from the west. Why, in the wintertime, we might get a northerly breeze to keep us a little bit cooler. In the summertime, one from the south to heat us up. But on this day, there were two things that almost doomed the city we call home. One, of course, was that the White Cloud was the northernmost boat. If it had been in the middle of the pack or at the end, when it got pushed out into the river, the current would have carried it south. Why, it would have kept on going and missed the other boats. But on this day, the second coincidence, the first being the White Cloud was the first boat in line, the northernmost boat. The second being that our weather on this particular day, the wind was not blowing from the west, but toward the west. The wind was not blowing toward Illinois, but from Illinois. So when that boat, now fully engulfed in flames, got pushed out into the river, the current carried it north, but the wind, this boat being some 200 feet long, 50 feet tall, the wind caught it like a sail and pushed it back into the other boats. Why, the first to catch was the Edward Bates. The Edward Bates was now on fire. The White Cloud crashed and bumped and hit, it seemed, 4, 5, 6 boats in a row. They in turn set their boats on fire. The wind was coming from the north and the east. On a normal day, even from the north, it would have been coming from the west, but not today. Not on the 18th, not on the 18th of May in 1849. It pushed the White Cloud back into the other boats and caught them on fire. Now all the men rushed to the fire. All 10 volunteer fire departments came as fast as they could. They poured water onto the boats quickly, but then, unbeknownst to many, perhaps those on the Martha knew, the steamboat Martha, they had a barrel of gunpowder below decks. By the time the fire struck the Martha, it was too late. All of a sudden, an explosion occurred 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet into the air, rose ashes and flames and metal shards like shrapnel, red hot by the flames and the fire. It was like, my friends, a rainbow of fire, red and white and blue and black. The smoke, they say you couldn't see a man 20 feet in front of you. And now this rainbow descended onto the city of St. Louis. At first, the wooden sidewalks would catch, and then the old Creole houses, the wooden houses, the older homes in the city of St. Louis, they were now on fire. And then even worse, along with all the wood, all the bales of cotton, all the bales of hemp along the waterfront stored for sale were barrel after barrel of whale oil. Whale oil and beef and pork and lard. Now, my friends, many people no longer cook with lard, but it's made of animal fat, highly combustible, highly flammable. Now the lard, the bacon, the brine, the bales of hay and cotton away from the levee, they were all now fully engulfed in flames. There was a wall of fire, not only along the waterfront, but between the dock houses, the warehouses, and the boats. And then, my friends, then something happened that you may not believe. The city of St. Louis, the city perched on the greatest two waterways in North America, the city of St. Louis ran out of water. The fire pumps had went dry. The spigots had gone dry. The fire hoses had all lessened. The water had been used and there was no more. The municipal water supply had given out. What to do now? Why, they dropped hoses and started pumping from the wells and the cisterns, and then they also were pumped dry. So what we have, 3 acres, 4 acres, 10 acres, 100 buildings currently on fire, a wall of flames and no water to fire it. I hear what you say. You say to me, why, go to the river, get your water from the river. But my friends, the river itself was on fire. The oils, the lard, the bacon, the grease, which no water will put out, had now engulfed the entire waterfront. There was no way to put it out. What to do? What to do? The men could stand there. They heard people screaming, running for their lives, everybody calling out to them, a cacophony of sound and languages, German, Gaelic, Irish, American, broken English, everybody screaming. What to do? One man had an idea. One man named Thomas Targee. Thomas Targee stood on one of the few remaining Indian mounds here in the city of St. Louis and looked over what was left of his city. Half of the city, it seemed, was now on fire. He saw his businesses, his friends' businesses, their homes, their livelihoods, everything going up in smoke. They did the best they could to save the South Market, which also served as the city hall. If they had lost City Hall, the records, the tax records, the insurance records, my friends, there would have been nothing left. Men would have fought for years over a strip of land, but they were able to remove all the records out of the City Hall. But he stood there and thought what to do. How do you put out a fire without water? 8 million pounds of wood on fire at St. Louis's doorstep. And now the buildings, one after another. Can you imagine the flames? Fire needs 2 things, my friends. It needs something to burn and oxygen to burn it with. And now the windstorm started. The wind started blowing 20 miles an hour, 30, 40 miles an hour. 8 million pounds of fire needs oxygen sucking in the air from every direction. What to do? The windstorm carried flames and wood and fire. Explosions were happening. Whale oil. What to do? Thomas Targee had an idea. The arsenal, which is still there just south of the city of St. Louis, contained barrels and barrels of gunpowder. What was happening, my friends? The city of St. Louis, built on the narrow streets of an earlier time, a block of buildings would catch on fire and then fall into the street, being pushed by the wind. They would then catch the houses and businesses and structures across the street on fire. So like dominoes, one by one by one, block after block, the city of St. Louis was tumbling down in a cascade of flames. What to do? Create a fire break. Create a fire break. We have no water. We have no way to put the fire out, so we must stop it, contain it somehow. Thomas Targee, crazy, heroic, my friends, I'll leave it for you to decide. He and some other men went down to the federal arsenal, took a wagon and grabbed 10 barrels of gunpowder. They needed to create a fire break. They needed to stop the dominoes from falling. Crazy, madness. pure heroics. They then took these 10 barrels of gunpowder, 52 pounds per barrel in a wagon, back into the inferno. My friends, all it would have taken is a spark. One spark from the sky falling down onto the wagon would have blown all these men sky high and doomed the city of St. Louis with even more destruction and fire. But they had to do something. They couldn't just watch their livelihoods go up in flames. They decided which buildings should go. They found a block of buildings they thought they must blow up to contain the fire. So that's what they did. One by one, these brave men, these historic, heroic men, took a barrel of gunpowder upon their shoulder, running through the flames, ashes falling from the sky. One spark is all it would have taken to kill every man there. They took these barrels of gunpowder, threw them into buildings which were currently on fire, and then ran for their lives, knowing that the explosion could happen at any second, but it would level the building. The building then would not fall down across the street into the buildings on the other side. So that's what they did. Thomas Targee identified the last building that needed to be blown. Phillips Music Store, a 3-story structure, a beautiful building that had to go. Thomas Targee hoisted upon his shoulder a 52-pound barrel of gunpowder, ran into that structure, threw the gunpowder in, and then tried to get out. But he didn't make it. For some reason, perhaps a spark hit him. Perhaps he threw the barrel into a spot that had already been on flames and it exploded before he could leave. A man some mile away nearly would later write that pieces of Thomas Targee in that building landed at his horse's feet. But my friends, it seems as if quenched by the blood of Thomas Targee himself, the fire went no further. It moved no further. Now, there was nothing they could do about the 15 blocks of the city of St. Louis that were currently on fire. Half of the city. In 1849, St. Louis was perhaps a mile north to south and only 10 blocks deep. Half of the city of St. Louis, 400 buildings burnt by 9 o'clock the next day, May 18th, 1849. But because of the heroics of Thomas Targee, because of the containment of the fire, it moved no further. Half of the city of St. Louis would burn, but the records would all be saved. Thomas Targee would later become a hero. Thomas Targee that night gave his life, fulfilling his civic duty to the city of St. Louis. Now, without those records, I know it seems like a small thing, but my friends, the city of St. Louis was able, as if a phoenix, to rise from the ashes. The Great Migration was still going on. Hundreds, thousands of people still going west. They still needed supplies, tools, weapons, tea, sugar, coffee. They still needed these things for the 2,000-mile journey from St. Louis to California or Oregon or the gold fields. St. Louis, because Targee had been able to save what was left of the city, would be reborn. Now, within 6 months, the city was back and up for business. Other cities tried to put the nail in our very coffin. Arrow Rock, Missouri, Independence, Missouri, Cincinnati, Ohio. They put ads in the newspaper. They said, do not go to St. Louis. St. Louis is out of business. Get your supplies here. That, my friends, to destroy the business of St. Louis would have destroyed the city itself. But within 6 months, we were reborn. The insurance records were saved. Everything was able to be rebuilt. I believe only 2 insurance companies faltered. All the other insurance companies were able to pay at 100%, which drew the city back. Now, I believe we are the 8th largest city in the United States. Look around you, my friends, here in downtown St. Louis. Certain laws were passed that made the city into what it is today. All buildings after 1849 had to be built from fireproof materials, which means stone and brick. Look around you, my friends, here in downtown St. Louis. You will find no wooden structures here. You will find no wooden structures up until Carondelet, the city of Carondelet, which until 1849 was not a part of the city of St. Louis. I believe later on 1852. So the city of Carondelet does have wooden structures, but nowhere else. My friends, I know you have things to do today and then perhaps other places to go. So let me just end this story with this. It's a little ditty we say down at the firehouse. It's the fireman from his slumbers waking, at once his own home forsaking, regardless of his health and life. It is the fireman that rushed toward and not away from the deadly strife. While still the cries of wild despair go wafting through the midnight air, the cries of fire, fire, fire. Well, I see that my transport over to Illinois is here, and so I must leave you for just a second, and I shall be back, and I hope that you have a wonderful and a safe day. All right, so that's the story real quickly of the fire of 1849. I'd like to show you what it looks like to have a steamboat on fire. This is a picture of the steamboat Lexington. You'll notice the flames and the explosions. These boilers were not the best made. Boilers would often weigh thousands and thousands of pounds of metal, and so when they exploded, you simply had shrapnel and fire and flames. Notice this is a colorized version. Notice the people in the water. Steamboats were extremely hazardous means of travel. They could make a steamboat for about $5,000 or $10,000. You could profit from a steamboat $5,000 or $10,000 on its first trip. So quite often steamboats were kept in service perhaps longer than they should have been. They could make as much money as possible. They were, once again, generally built of white pine covered in flammable paint. So all you need is a strike. Here's our hero. This is Thomas Targee. This is from an original painting. It once, I believe, was down at the St. Louis Firefighters Museum. You may notice some things on here that they have that not so much prevalent today. I don't know how well your chat features are working or if you have that availability, but you may want to take a look at this and see what firemen had today. Certainly is different from what they had at this time. So here at the bottom over here, one thing you may notice is a bucket. Now, every home in the city of St. Louis, certainly on the East Coast, quite often you are required by law to have at least one bucket, often two, at your front doorstep. One of these buckets would either be empty or contain water. The other bucket would contain sand or dirt. And for those of you out there in computer land, take a quick second. Why would you have one with water and one with sand or dirt? All right. Those of you who cook at home and those of you who have ever fried chicken and perhaps experienced a small fire, you know you do not throw water on a grease fire. Throwing water on a grease fire often leads to a small explosion, which will spread the fire. So you would have a gallon of water or a water bucket and a sand or dirt bucket. Because once again, bacon, pork, lard, these things can be highly flammable at extreme heat. So here's your bucket. And often you will see something, what we call a bucket brigade. A lot of old movies and things, you'll have a bucket brigade. Well, the fire department doesn't have 200 buckets stored in their building. Where did all these buckets come from? They came from the houses. People would immediately come out with their bucket and join the bucket brigade. All right. Here you see his microphone and his amplifier. That's all they had. Missouri House, Missouri Fire Company number 5. You can see on his belt there. So this is Thomas Targee. Thomas Targee left a wife and I believe 4 or 6 children. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact amount. It was one or the other. He actually went to his wife and asked for her permission before he went and got the gunpowder, and she gave him that permission. After he died, the city of St. Louis gave her his job. He was the city weigher. So he worked down on the docks. Not the docks, he worked down on the riverfront. And when somebody came in and said, I have 100 pounds of flour to sell, he would weigh to make sure that that flour was 100 pounds. So his wife was given his job. Now, it sounds like small condolence, but remember, in 1849, women generally did not work outside the home. So for the city of St. Louis to give her a municipal position was rather out of the ordinary. And now I'd like to show you, before I continue with another story, the picture. So this is what the city of St. Louis somewhat looked like during the fire. Let's see here, if I can fill the screen as much as possible. You can see all the fire along the waterfront. You can see the map at the bottom. The darker areas are what was destroyed. Now there was one thing in downtown St. Louis which still stands today. I ask a quick question. Does anybody know what that structure is? What is the one structure that is still there that the Great Fire of 1849 did not destroy? And here it is. Well, let me see here. I don't have my glasses on, so that's kind of bad. But this is the what we today call the Old Cathedral. The Old Cathedral was one of the very few structures downtown that survived the fire. All right. Okay, now I believe we do have some time left. All right, yep. Okay, I would like to talk to you now perhaps about a man, well, first off, also let me go ahead and get this. I did not write this book. I do not have any way of profiting off of this book, but I wanted to show you this was written by a person who works at the Missouri Historical Society. If you would like to know more about the Great Fire of 1849 and the cholera epidemic, which killed 10% of the city of St. Louis in 1849, this would be a tremendous book to have. All right, here in the city of St. Louis, many people made their living along the waterfront, some young, some old. As a matter of fact, one of the gentlemen who made a living in the city of St. Louis on the steamboat trade was a young man at the name of Louie Roche. Louie Roche, at the age of 12 years old, as a matter of fact, on his 12th birthday in 1864, snuck out of his home, went down to the levee in St. Louis and boarded a steamboat. He wanted to be a steamboatman. At the age of 12 years old, he ran away from home in St. Louis, hopped on a steamboat, and went down to New Orleans, where he would start a career in steamboating that would span pretty much the rest of his life. He's got a couple of great stories. One of them I'd like to share with you. One involves the steamboat, the Emily LaBarge. Now, many people have asked him, he once said, what it's like to be on a steamboat that's sinking. For those of you who know a little bit about river history, let me pass some things on to you. A snag is a tree that is one point along the river's edge, but has fallen into the river. This tree will then sink to the bottom of the river. The root system will go down to the bottom. The current will point the limbs and the tree trunk toward steamboats who are going up river. Now, obviously, if you're going down river, the points and the trunks are pointed in the same direction as you, perhaps not causing much damage. But if you have a snag here and a steamboat coming this way and it hits the snag, the steamboat will sink. And we have another thing called a Sawyer. May sound familiar to you. Some of you may know a name called Tom Sawyer. Well, a Sawyer is a tree that has fallen into the river, which pretty much acts like a torpedo. A Sawyer will float down the river, and once again, if you're going upriver, it strikes the boat and will sink the boat rather quickly. So, and for those, one last thing, those of you who may have some interest in our buddy Mark Twain, has anybody's ever wondered where Samuel Langhorne Clemens got his writing name? I can tell you. As boats would come up to the dock, to a levee, they would call out, half Twain, full Twain, Mark Twain. Mark Twain is 12 feet of water. Mark Twain equals 2 fathoms of water. Mark Twain, 12 feet, is the depth of water a paddle steamboat needs to operate. It needs 12 feet of water. So that is where our buddy Mark Twain got his name from. Mark Twain means 2 fathoms or 12 feet of water, or safe navigation for a paddle wheeler. Well, let's get back to Louie Roche. Louie Roche happens to be on the Emily LaBarge in 1874, going upriver on the Missouri, when, as he's eating dinner, all of a sudden the boat is rocked. He is tossed out of his chair onto the floor. He knows exactly what has happened. He gets a lantern, rushes down to the bilge of the boat, the bottom of the boat, where he sees water rushing in. He immediately gets the 24 passengers, the 30 crew members. They all scramble up. They go up to the top of the boat, the Emily LaBarge, as the boat sinks. Little by little, foot by foot, the boat is about 4 decks tall, so 40 feet. And as they go, they simply, now we have 50 people up on the Texas deck, the very top of the steamboat, and they are essentially waiting to die. They are waiting for the steam. This boat was in full operation, head full of steam, boilers full of coal. They are waiting for this boat to blow up. They have no other alternative. Many of them cannot swim, so they don't want to jump into the water. And all of a sudden, then the whistle, the steam whistle, starts to blow, starts to scream. He says, we simply all crossed our arms, held our breath, and nothing happened. The steamboat did not blow up, but it did sink. Little by little, foot by foot, the steamboat sank. The 40-foot tall steamboat sank in 38 feet of water. The steamboat touched bottom. The Emily LaBarge, a sunken steamboat, now had 54 people on its top deck, where they would spend the night on a sunken steamboat. Now, to my knowledge, that's the only time people have slept on a sunken steamboat before. They all survived. This, my friends, is a rarity, a very, very rare occurrence, that a steamboat would sink, that not that a steamboat would sink, but that a steamboat would sink without blowing up, and it would sink and still stay above the water, saving the lives of 54 people. Now, in 1852, this was not so lucky. The steamboat Saluda, it's called the Lexington Bend on the Missouri River. The Lexington Bend out near Lexington, Missouri, the river almost doubles back on itself. You have to build up a head of steam, take that curve, and then go full force west when, once again, as I said, normally the wind is blowing from the west. So the steamboat Saluda sat there for 2 days. It made several attempts to round the bend and go forward, each time pushed back, which is dangerous in itself. Steamboats don't steer in reverse. Finally, the captain of the Saluda has an idea. He starts throwing tar, bacon, rotten meat, pig fat, lard. He starts throwing these things into the boiler to create more heat, which would then, of course, create more steam and power. There was a large crowd of people standing up on the bluffs watching this event. When he turned the corner, headed upriver, seemed to be making some good progress, when the steamboat Saluda blew up, killing roughly 100 people on board. That happened right here in the Missouri River, just south of Kansas, or just east of Kansas City, Missouri. All right, let's check our time. Do we have time? Well, maybe for one quick more story, or if anybody has any questions. Yeah, I see somebody had written Fire, Pestilence, Death by Christopher Allen Gordon. That's a wonderful book for those who would want to see it. This is a book of, this is an older book. I don't know that you could find it any place but perhaps a library. This is called Old Man River, which talks about the life of Louie Roche, St. Louisan. Well, actually from France, came to St. Louis as a small child. This is kind of neat. I like this book because I am from originally Ferguson. This book is written by a man named Hereford. There's a street in Ferguson called Hereford. His brother was actually at one point the mayor of Ferguson, Missouri. And so this is a local book, very nice. My sister found this for me. This was at a book signing. He signed this in 1941 at a book signing, I guess, for another patron. So if you have want to know some river history, Old Man River by Hereford. Robert Hereford. That's kind of an interesting book. All right, well, I think my time is just about up. So I wanted to make sure that if you have any questions, feel free to type them into there. Also, I'm happy to answer any questions about some local history. My email address is actually stlouishistory@aol.com. STLOUISHIS. Yep, there it is. St. Louis History at AOL.com. And happy to get any questions. I don't know it all, believe me, but I'm happy to do a little research for you because then I get to learn something myself. So thank you all very much for allowing me to come into your living rooms, dining rooms, or wherever you might be. And I humbly thank you for the opportunity to talk about St. Louis history.
Yay. Thank you, Barney.
All right. Thank you.
That was great. Anybody have any questions or comments for Barney? You can go ahead and unmute if you do.
Sure. Feel free to ask me, or if later on, if you have a question about something. Now, one of the discrepancies, there are two stories about, in a sense, which boat left the dock. I have always been told, and my research indicated that the White Cloud was the boat that left and then came back and crashed into other opportunities, whereas other people have said that the boat, the Edward Bates, was the one that actually left the dock and then crashed into the other boats. So that perhaps, you know, there really wasn't very much written about the Great Fire. People are very pragmatic at this time. Hey, how's it going?
Hang on.
How you doing? There we go. Is that?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, I see you, Bobby, but I can't hear you.
Yeah, Bobby, can you type the question in to the chat?
Or do you got your mute on?
Well, I muted it because there was.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, Mike, you have a question?
No, sounded good.
I guess you're just
All right.
raising your hand.
Well, and just as a one last comment, perhaps, Phelim O'Toole, one thing I love about local history and I love about history in general is these folks are real people. They have descendants. Has anybody here ever purchased a home, perhaps from Phelim O'Toole Realty here in the city of St. Louis or St. Louis County? Phelim O'Toole Realty was owned and operated by his great-grandson, who still, well, actually, I think he passed about 2 years ago, but I was able to give this program at the museum I was working at one point, and this gentleman came out of the audience and shook my hand and introduced himself and gave me his card. He was Phelim O'Toole IV. So I love the fact that this local history, and as many of you may know, anywhere you walk downtown, any step you take, you're stepping at a place where perhaps a duel was fought, a love was made, history is underneath your footsteps.
Very cool. Thank you. So I think Bobby had a question. As a former national park ranger at the old courthouse, we were taught that it was indeed the White Cloud.
Okay, awesome. Comment. Yeah, and oddly enough, well, I don't want to really say that oddly enough, but in the book, it says that the Edward Bates, and now I don't know where, obviously Christopher Gordon has the full resources of the Missouri Historical Society Library, but in my research, it was the White Cloud that abandoned, or in essence left the dock. The book says the Edward Bates is the ship that leaves the dock and then crashes into the other boats. So I will leave that to, I'll leave that between you and Chris, Bobby. Because I've never questioned him on it. Now, as a theory about why the cathedral didn't burn,
right.
In actuality, I don't know why it didn't burn, because it's not like it was today. Obviously, today it sits absolutely denuded of other buildings and structures. The highway, of course, on one side. In this point, in 1849, this church was surrounded by other buildings. So why it didn't burn, perhaps special attention was paid to it. Perhaps there were those who you know, one of the greater problems was things falling from the sky. And so like with the South City Market, they had people on the roof, the same as they did. I've been fortunate enough to visit the cathedral in London. And every night during the bombings there, they had people on the roof and who risked their own lives while these bombs came down, and any fire or whatever that fell on the London cathedral, they were out there chucking it on the side or putting it out.
Mm-hmm.
So, but as to why the cathedral didn't burn, first of all, it is made of stone. It is a stone structure. So that's probably perhaps the biggest reason. And the other reason I can think it may have received some special attention by St. Louis at that time was primarily a Catholic city.
Mm. Makes sense.
Cathedral, former park ranger, springboard to learn in the Butler family. All right. Is anybody else? I think once again, St. Louis is the last. I don't know. I think I'm over time, but certainly
Okay.
Biggest steamboat disaster in the history of the world. Many of us know, of course, the Titanic. Has anybody never heard of the Titanic? Why, we've all heard of the Titanic. Why? Well, because it sank, 1,500 people died. How many here have heard of the Sultana steamboat disaster? And I know some folks out there, Bobby and Sherry, perhaps other people, Mike, know of the Sultana. The Sultana was a steamboat heading north on the Mississippi River after the Civil War, loaded with 2,100 is an estimate, 2,100 people. Most of these men had just been released from prisoner of war camps in the South. And Louie Roche, as a matter of fact, in Old Man River, was on a boat, one of the first to see, in a sense, what happened. The Sultana exploded about 2 miles south of Memphis, Tennessee. Upwards of 1,700 people, more than the Titanic. 1,700 people died on the Sultana when it blew up. Now, this is a boat that blew up less than 200 miles from where we currently sit, or at least from where I sit here in the city of St. Louis. Why haven't we ever heard about that? Why is the Titanic get all the, well, I don't want to say press, but why do we all know about the Titanic, but very few of us have ever heard of the Sultana, which is in our own backyard? And these were all, and not that any life is more valuable than any other, but these were all American Union soldiers who died coming north, trying to go home. So once again, if you interested in steamboat history or disasters, take a look at Sultana. You'll find a lot of information on that.
Wow. Thanks. I really actually learned a lot listening to this. That was really, really interesting.
Okay.
So everybody, I'm going to put the link up there again to the survey. If you're listening via Zoom, there's the link if you want to fill out the survey and let us know what you thought and what you learned. I'm going to put, there are some people watching from Facebook too. I don't think we see them here, but they're watching on Facebook. So I'm going to put that link up on Facebook as well. And Barney, I want to thank you so much. We'll be back here. Thank you very much. We'll be back here again tomorrow at 10 a.m. with Rick Weiss. He's going to be sharing stories called Twice Upon a Time. And then tomorrow evening, we have Later Tales with Dre Guevara for adults. And then Friday evening, we'll have our digital Decameron. So join us this week. We'll have story sessions over the next 6 weeks. So make sure you check out our schedule at stlstorytellingfestival.com. And please take a moment to fill out the survey. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day and be well.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.